Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Don't forget to subscribe to Check Call, the newsletter on FreightWaves.com if you haven't already. Today we welcome Scott Cornell, Travelers Transportation Practice Lead and Crime and Theft Specialist. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've been talking about cargo theft a little bit on the show, but this one I'm kind of excited because we're getting into one specific area that is happening within the cargo theft world, and that's MC number manipulation. But before we get into that and everything that means, why don't you give us some background on you and kind of how you got started at Travelers?
Sure. I've been at Travelers for coming up on 24 years. I started in the investigative division shortly into my time here because I had experience doing cargo theft investigations in my prior life before Travelers. I was asked to start a cargo theft investigation team here. So myself and then the first investigator that was brought into the team, DZ Patterson, we built the team starting in 2005. Currently, there's 14 investigators in that team. It's grown exponentially. It's done really well. It's had a big impact for our clients. So that team is on call 24/7, 365 to respond to cargo thefts for our clients when they have them. And we spend a lot of time also working with our clients to teach them how not to have those thefts in the first place. So that's kind of where I started at Travelers. And then in 2015, I was asked to step into the transportation practice lead role. Did that and have been doing that ever since. So I kind of serve as the subject matter expert on cargo theft because it's something I've been doing for about 29 years of my career, and lead the transportation division as well.
I like that. I also feel like because you've had that kind of wide background of the different areas of cargo theft and everything, I feel like that really kind of makes you the perfect fit to just kind of come in and be like, I have the answers and nobody's thieving on my watch.
Yeah, and my first job out of high school really was working in a warehouse, and then I drove a truck for that company, and then found out I liked it. Drove truck, driving flatbed and doing building supply material when I was in college. So I've been around the trucking industry in one way, shape, form, or another since I was 18 years old, and I just love it. I think it's a great industry. Salt of the earth people make great relationships in it. It's interesting. There's always new things coming out and to keep up with. And so it's just been something that I've built my career around.
I also have found that those, and I'm happy to see that you are also a victim of it, of those who start in the transportation and supply chain industry, can't ever leave. Much to our disappointment here. Once you're in, you're kind of stuck in there.
Yeah, I think you become passionate about it, and you just want to be around it.
Yeah, it's for me, it's like the high of problem solving. It's unmatched anywhere else. But I guess kind of jumping into our main topic for today, before we get too far into one specific area, what are some of those trends overall that you are seeing in cargo theft? Because you kind of have that front row seat to it.
I think high level is just the massive increase that we've seen from 2022 until 2024, right? We saw a little bit of a bump during the COVID year. I think all of us who are considered experts in the field, we kind of expected that. That wasn't really a big surprise. But we noticed that after COVID, it didn't really come down fully. It only came down part way. And then slowly after that, it started to tick up again. And then from 2022 to 2023, according to the CargoNet numbers, which is what I usually quote when I'm talking about cargo theft, it jumped 57%. And of that 57%, strategic cargo theft jumped about just shy of 1,500%. I always kind of clarify, there's two main categories of cargo theft. There's straight theft, which means they physically go straight out to the cargo and they steal it where it sits, truck stops, parking lots, drop lots, you name it. And then there's strategic theft, where they trick you into giving them the freight. And strategic theft was traditionally about 5 or 6% of all cargo theft. And from 2022 to 2024, it's become, I think, around 43% of all cargo theft. So really hit that brokerage division of the supply chain quickly with massive increases. And again, cargo theft overall has increased dramatically over those last couple of years. There's no indication right now that it's going to slow down. I don't think it's ever going to go back to what we've seen in the past. I think that we're going to have a new normal at some point. And when it levels off at some point, then that'll be how the industry will have to operate and combat it. Within that strategic theft increase, the most common method of cargo theft that we're seeing is what we would call a double brokering scam. It always starts with identity theft. Somebody pretends to be a legitimate trucking company. They get booked on the freight. They then turn around, pretend to be a freight broker. They hire a legitimate trucking company that has no idea that they're being hired by a bad guy to go and pick up the freight and have it rerouted and delivered to a location where they can get their hands on it. That's the most common method that we're seeing. But the most alarming method that the industry has seen over the last couple of years is the MC number manipulation that you've indicated we're going to talk about more today.
And that's something that I have, because obviously, it's when you're used to all, not all, but a lot of the cargo theft being like, oh, you stopped within 100 miles of a warehouse in a bad area of town, you're just gonna get like just some normal theft. Not that theft should be normal, but go in, take something off the back of the truck, you report it as stolen, you kind of move on. There's not, unfortunately, not a lot you can really do about that. But no, people have gotten much more creative in a bad way. That's not the creativity in innovation that I'm looking for, if I'm being honest. So that's not great. But even when it comes to so even when it kind of comes to figuring out if it's a legitimate MC or not, people are very bold with it. Like, you can go on Reddit of all places and people are like, I'm looking for an MC number that has this many years and like this many like road checks or like this kind of clean, and like I'll pay this much for it. And I'm like, and in the comments, people are like, I have this MC, like, how much would you want for it? And other stuff like that. And I'm like, you're literally doing this, like, just in the open, but also like it's kind of one of those where, like, from a prosecution standpoint, you're chasing a ghost for the most part. So before we get too farther, can you break down what exactly happens with MC number manipulation, and then also why it is so tricky to catch?
I'll start by going back to when we started to see it become prevalent, right? So it was about 2 to 2.5 years ago. A handful of us that are subject matter experts on this got some intel in the industry that, hey, somebody bought a little over 400 MC numbers. And immediately we thought, okay, what's going on with this? What are they going to do with this? And what we kind of predicted is what really came true, which was, okay, they're going to use a certain number of those, maybe half of those MC numbers, to haul freight legitimately. And they're going to use the other half to steal. And then when they burn out the half that they used to steal, they'll flip the switch on the ones that they've been using to haul freight and establish trust with to go and steal. And they'll be able to even do more damage because they've built up trust, they've built up connections, they've gathered intel. So we saw that happen or start up about 2.5 years ago. And then after that, it just started to snowball. And we saw them start buying them by the thousands. And to your point, we see it all over social media. Hey, we're interested in buying your MC numbers. There are actually small little cottage industries out there, or people out there that may belong to some of these organized cargo theft rings that will spend the day just calling and soliciting the purchase of MC numbers. So that's kind of where it started. And it's just kind of snowballed from there. It's really gotten to a point. One of the things I always talk about when I talk about these organized cargo theft rings is I say they're really good at two things in particular. One is they know exactly what to steal and when to steal it to get the best return on their dollar for what they're stealing. And the other thing is return on investment. Cargo thieves are excellent at return on investment. So how does that apply to this MC conundrum? If we spend $20,000 on an MC number as an organized cargo theft ring, but we can steal 20 loads and the average load stolen is slightly over $200,000, that's a great return on investment. And so that's how they've looked at it. They go out, they solicit these MC numbers, they buy them. If they think that they're going to be able to get enough business from a particular MC number, they'll pay what they need to for it because they know they're going to get a high return on the dollar for it.
That's insane that they could even know, like, even the possible return on that investment of buying that MC number, because if you know that eventually you'll probably get caught, but it's how much you can get, but knowing kind of how much you can get done and how much revenue you can collect before you get caught, that feels like a very niche and specific, unfortunately, a very niche and specific kind of like way to collect information, if you will.
They're very calculated about it. They know exactly what they're doing. When they look at these MC numbers, they look at, first of all, when they approach people about it, they like to use very specific language. Hey, we're interested in buying your business, right? Hey, it's your MC number, but we know that you've built a business behind that MC number. We know that you've worked hard over the years to build the business behind that MC number. Now, they'll buy an MC number that may not have a lot of business behind it, that may be dormant or may have been sitting, or that somebody kind of shelved after the COVID years, after the COVID year, and then they went back to hauling for somebody else. They'll buy those too. That no question, they'll buy those too. But they love to really look for the ones that are, it's time to get out of the business. I'm ready to move on, or I'm going to go back to hauling for a larger company, but I have established some business behind this. I haul for X, Y, and Z. I get regular business from these freight brokers. They love those in particular, and they'll target those and they'll say, hey, we're going to buy your cell phone number, your email address. We're buying your business. And that's kind of the way they sell it, right? Hey, we're buying the business that you built. We want your cell phone number. We want your email address. We want your logins. And they do that so that there's no indication that that MC number has changed hands for at least a certain period of time. And in doing so, that's where they can kind of get that idea of, hey, we're buying this. We have logins on these load boards, or we have logins with these freight brokers. We have relationships built with these freight brokers. We can probably haul X number of loads for X amount of time before anybody figures out that this has changed hands, and we should make a big chunk of money.
How do you, so like you say that like they'll buy everything, emails, phone, the whole nine yards. How do you then, from the flip side of things, so if I'm a baddie and I've come in and taken carriers A's information, I have all of their business now in my possession. How do you, as like a shipper or a broker or anyone that's looking, that like comes across this MC, how do you know that it's invalid? Like how do you know that it's a stolen MC? Is there anything that you know other than like, no, because like they have all of the business, so I don't know how you would know.
It's very tough without some help or without some resources that can help you get a little bit deeper dive on some of these. But they did that intentionally. They adjusted to the industry. And what do I mean by that? So when this started to become prevalent, when we saw the MC manipulation first come into the industry, myself, other experts would go out when we would teach or speak on the subject and say, hey, if you see a change in the contact information in the FMCSA for a trucking company, revet that carrier before you assign a load to it. If you see a change in phone number, a change in email, change in address, any of that information is changed in FMCSA within the last 6 months or a year or 18 months, whatever time frame you wanted to set at the time. If you see that, revet that carrier because of what's going on. Well, they figured out pretty quickly that the industry was doing that. So that's when they went to, hey, we'll buy the email address, we'll buy the phone number, we're buying your business. And they did that to create the exact confusion you're alluding to, which is, okay, last week, this MC number, was owned by somebody that we had been doing business with for 2 years and had no issues. And this week, it's now owned by the bad guys. And how do you know that? And a lot of times it's hard to figure that out. Now, if you have some additional resources, there's several businesses that have come into the industry as a result of this that will help you do a deeper dive. They can actually indicate that, hey, the IP address has changed for the email. This email is coming from out of the country. The phone number appears to be the same, but it's actually coming from another country or a different part of the country. The bank account, the one thing you can't fake for sure is where's the money go. you can't send the money to the prior owners, right? So somewhere in there has to be some kind of a change like that. And so there are ways to pick that up. There are also companies that have come into the industry that specialize in that. Those are good resources for companies to insert into their process that they need to put in place on how they vet carriers.
That brings, like, because if you, I feel like you would almost have to start using some of those companies or some of those resources outside your organization to come in and help, because otherwise you're literally just sitting there constantly revetting the carriers that you already have in your network and revetting any new ones, because if the sale could happen overnight, and maybe, and probably your carrier probably won't tell you, if it's not a carrier you do business with all the time, which for most brokerages, like, you're not gonna, like, you might do a one-off load with somebody if they call in on a load board, or excuse me, there's a lot of different like, there's, like, basically there's not necessarily that consistency of working with that carrier. So if you call carrier Z, you always talk to Don, and now suddenly you're talking to Joe, like, that could be a red flag. But also for those carriers that you don't work with that often, but like, you toss them a load every couple months, like, you wouldn't know that, oh, I always talk to Don and now I'm talking to Joe.
That's exactly right. And the person in your company is not going to be the same every time either, right? So one day, if you and I work at the same company, one day it could be me talking, and I don't ever call that company again. The next day it's you talking to them. And between the two of us, we never know that it should be Joe or should be Luke or should be somebody else, right?
But the financial part of it makes a lot of sense, because the money always has to go somewhere, because no one's ever going to say, oh, let me buy your banking information too. No. If someone ever does say that, please don't agree and run away as fast as you can and report them somewhere.
Right. Never agree to that. Yeah, and I think your point is well made. It does appear as though you almost have to go out and get one of these companies to help you with it. You don't, but you don't have to. You can create your own internal process. And some freight brokers are really good with technology, and they can kind of almost create their own internal fail safes within their systems to help with this. And a lot of them do. But sure, it's a good idea to go out and get that resource if you can't do that. If you don't think that you can build the whole thing yourself, go out and get one of those resources. When I talk about that cargo thieves are really good at return on investment, I preach back to the industry that we also have to be good at return on investment. We have to make the investment in security. We have to make the investment in prevention, just like they make the investment into trying to steal from us. So if you're not investing in these things, you're probably going to have a tougher time. And I know that some of the things out there can be pretty pricey. But again, we have to look at it and say, okay, I can spend X number of dollars on this, or I can lose X number of dollars in cargo theft, which is probably a 5-to-1 ratio at worst.
Yeah. And that's not necessarily just the value of the cargo that's lost as well. It's like that value of, like, your name, your brand, your reputation among your shippers, among your carriers. Because it's not just a matter of, like, oh, that's never going to happen to me. Like, no, it'll happen. It's just a matter of when and how often. And that's where, like, sharing the situations that happen, sharing different things is kind of the best way to prevention. But also, you bring up a really good point, because a lot of people don't have their back office accounting talk to anyone on operations. So they process a bank change or something like that. They just process it on their own, because it's not uncommon for carriers to be like, oh, we need to pay things differently or whatever. I will never understand a carrier's financials, and I have accepted the fact that that's how that is. But from a brokerage perspective, like, being able to say, oh, we got this weird financial request. And it's one thing if it goes to, like, a freight factoring company or something like that, but to be able, I think, like, putting a process in that says, okay, well, we need to call the person that we know at the carrier, and also let kind of that, the carrier vetting team know that, like, we've had a change. So we need to just kind of run them back through just to make sure that nothing's really changed, because they could have gotten got by fraud themselves and now have to change their banking information. But definitely calling and just verifying. Yeah, it takes maybe 20 minutes of getting the right person, double checking and like revetting someone, but that slight investment of time is worth it so much on the back end.
It is, and what you're talking about, how we've been messaging it to the industry, is, a couple of decades ago, safety became a huge topic of discussion for the transportation industry. And from there, it grew into a culture of safety, which is a fantastic thing, right? How can we be more safe? What kind of technology can we put in the trucks? How can we better train the drivers? How can we recruit the best drivers? You name it, right? It became a culture of how the supply chain does business. When it comes to supply chain security, it tends to be a bit of a patchwork. Well, we think we have a gap over here, so let's get something in place to fill that gap. Or we think, there's a weakness in this spot, so let's get something to fill that weakness. But what needs to happen at this point is it needs to become a culture of the supply chain, that soup to nuts approach where someone in your sales department can't be negotiating a contract to move high target commodities out of a high target part of the country into a high target part of the country without talking to everybody that's involved in the security process of your team and getting feedback on, this is what it would cost us to secure that route. This is the risk that we're picking up if we sign that contract for that route, for that commodity, this time of year, right? All those things have to become part of how you do business, and they have to become part of your process from end to end, not just a patchwork. And the other great point that you touched on that I talk about often is, what is the cost of cargo theft? A lot of people will immediately go with the value of the load. Okay, it's a $200,000 load. But let's give a couple of different scenarios. Let's say it's a load of gaming consoles pre-Christmas. You're trying to get your gaming consoles out, the newest, latest, greatest model of your gaming console out to the stores for Christmas. That load's stolen. Okay, the value of the load's $225,000. But if it's stolen, you're not on the shelf next to your competitor. Your branding isn't in place next to that competitor. Does it hurt your branding? If you're the freight broker or the carrier, does that end your relationship with that shipper? And now you've lost that contract, you've lost that deal, and how much is that worth? What's the cost to remanufacture those gaming consoles? What's the cost to reship them, handle the claim, you name it, all of those things that are kind of ancillary to the theft itself. You take another commodity, 2015, 2016, the nut industry was completely caught off guard by cargo theft. If you talk to the farmers, the agricultural business in California, they had never heard of cargo theft. They didn't know what it was. And that's one of the reasons why the cargo thieves targeted it. Nuts were very popular. We were seeing a ton of commercials about their healthy benefits and, great snack, great healthy snack and everything like that, which is awesome. But that makes it valuable, and that's when the cargo thieves are going to steal it. Because remember what I said, the other thing they're good at is, what do we steal and when do we steal it? So they went after that industry, and that industry was completely caught off guard. But there's a commodity that you can't remanufacture. You have to wait until the next harvest. So the bigger the impact of loss in an industry like that, especially an agricultural industry of any kind, you have to make up for the cost of losing those loads in the costs of the loads that you haven't lost. And that's a big impact to the consumer.
I also, every time I hear something about cargo theft and like what thieves have targeted, it just leaves me with like a picture, like you said, nuts. I just imagine somebody with 40,000 pounds of almonds, like walking around like, hey, you want some almonds? Do you want some almonds? Like, and I know it's a little bit more sophisticated than that, but that is what goes through my mind.
They have a complete network on how they're going to move stolen goods. We don't often, I wish they were walking around doing that. It would be much easier for us to catch them.
Or like I saw something of like they stole like a bunch of like crab or lobster earlier this year. It was like $30,000 worth of crab and lobster. And I'm just imagining like somebody rolls up with this truck and they're like, well, what do we do with all of this? Like, I guess we're just having a lot of lobster. But no, it's just like, I know it's a lot more sophisticated than that, but like in my head, it's like a movie of like someone walking around like, hey, I got a great deal on some lobster out back.
I mean, some of that does happen. So you're not completely off base. The smaller, less sophisticated regional crews, they will do some of that. They'll sell things at flea markets, or they will do, a good sales pitch. In other words, they may pull up to a small mom and pop store and say, "Hey, this load got rejected, but it's good. I need to get rid of it. I need to get offloaded so that I can get more loads and keep moving. And I don't have any way to get rid of this. Are you interested in some of this freight? I can give it to you for 50 cents on the dollar." Those small, less sophisticated crews, that's what we saw them do for decades. And so that's not completely off base. We used to see them sell as much as they could out of the back of the truck. They'd park in an open lot somewhere. They'd sell as much as they could out of the back of the truck. And then when people stopped coming, they just let it rot. They would just leave it, and we would find it there, rotting in the sun, things like that. So you're not completely off base with what you're talking about.
All right. Well, we are running out of time today. And Scott, since we've had 150 episodes of hot dogs versus sandwiches, I feel like it's time to start anew, you know? So today it's the inaugural question of the new end of the question. And it is, if you had to live in a food themed house, what would it be made of?
I would have a castle made up of my wife's stuffed peppers. She makes the best stuffed peppers. My wife is Italian. She's a great Italian cook, and she does a fantastic job with those. So I would live in a stuffed pepper castle.
I feel like that's also going to win a lot of brownie points with your wife. That of all the foods in the world you could choose, you chose her stuffed peppers.
This will be shown to her numerous times, yes, especially pre-Christmas.
But also, I feel like that castle would smell amazing. I'm not gonna lie.
Would. It would.
All right. So if anyone has questions on cargo theft, where can they find you outside the show?
So you can go to travelers.com/transportation resources. We have a lot of information on there. You're welcome to post my contact information at any time. I'm always accessible. I tell everybody, you don't have to be a client for me to help you. You can always reach out. I obviously, if you're not a client, I can't do it for you, but I can point you in the right direction. I can introduce you to resources. I can answer some simple questions for you, and maybe that ends up making you a client at some point. But I'm always open to people reaching out. I get that pretty consistently. I always say that when I go out to a speaking event. I'm always happy to help. It's, for me, and I think for most subject matter experts on this topic, it's about combating cargo theft in general. And I think Travelers has always been very good about promoting that, hey, we want to be good corporate citizens and we just want to help in general.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Just kind of share that knowledge as much as you can. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
You can find Check All the Podcasts anywhere you get your podcasts, like Apple Podcast and Spotify. Don't forget to check out all the other incredible FreightWaves shows, and don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.